What's happening, everybody? The Purple Perch is back. Got a lot to talk about tonight, a lot of interesting things. We're going to break tonight's episode down into basically three segments. We're going to be looking at Ravens changes upcoming with free agents, the roster, what to look ahead for the Baltimore Ravens. We're going to be looking at some of the coaching changes and departures that we've seen and maybe some possible additions. And then just kind of a little bit of the state of the Ravens overall right now, because this has been a very, very trying offseason for those of us Ravens fans who live and die by the successes and failures of the team. This one's been challenging, man. You know, with the Super Bowl upcoming, it's hard not to feel like still, even now, that the Ravens should be in this game. The Ravens are such an interesting team because one of the things that I'll say for this season has been in their good games, it really felt like there was nobody that could beat this team. Like when the Ravens were on their game, it felt like nobody in the NFL could beat them. They were unbeatable. However, when they weren't, they looked like a very, very mortal team, a very weak team. And it is a big swing. And so there's been a lot to understand with the fact that this was an earlier exit than anyone anticipated. And again, you know, for all intents and purposes, this was a one and done year for the Ravens. I mean, you beat the Houston Texans in the playoffs in the divisional round. You got to win that game, right? If you're the Ravens, that shouldn't even be a game. For the first half, it was a tight game, a lot tighter than it probably should have been. And then, you know, you move into the AFC Championship game, one game away, and you just come out flat. So let's look ahead a little bit to, you know, some of the changes upcoming, because if you look at this list of Ravens free agents, it is a long, long list. And in fact, I will go ahead and bring it up and share it with you here on the screen so that people can see this. I'm going to read you just some of the names on the list, this list of free agents. Odell Beckham Jr., Kevin Zeitler, Gus Edwards, Rock Ya-Sin, Nelson Aguilar, Patrick Queen, Tyler Huntley, Jadeveon Clowney, Geno Stone, Ronald Darby, J.K. Dobbins, Josh Johnson, Justin Madubuike, Daryl Worley, Brent Urban, Laquan Treadwell, Devin Duvernay, Malik Harrison, Delshawn Phillips, Arthur Millette, Trayvon Mullen, John Simpson, Ardarius Washington. I mean, that's a long list, man. That is a tremendous number of players that were valuable. And I understand some people can look at that list and go, okay, well, some of those guys weren't major contributors. Maybe, you know, the argument could be made that you overpaid for Odell. Personally, I think Odell brought a lot of value to the team beyond the production. But regardless of someone's opinion on that, one of the things that made the Ravens so successful this year was their depth. And these guys that are on this list, this is a lot of that depth. These are a lot of those role players, right? I mean, beyond a Gus Edwards and, you know, and Patrick Queen, some headliners there. But what about a Rock Ya-Sin? Okay, so maybe he was a little inconsistent in there, but I can tell you who wasn't: Geno Stone, Ronald Darby, Justin Madubuike, Brent Urban. These guys played big, big roles on this team. Arthur Millette came up big in many, many situations. And a lot of these guys we know are going to be back. You know, you can feel pretty confident about that. But the reality is when you go into such a turbulent offseason, man, it becomes challenging. It becomes challenging to even think about the possibility of losing some of these players that were so, so important to what the Ravens were accomplishing. You know, coming into the season, one of the biggest question marks for the Ravens was the pass rush. They didn't really have that guy, that anchor pass rusher that you just felt like this guy is going to be the difference maker, right? We still have not seen that happen with Odafe Owe yet. And so it turned out Justin Madubuike had a career year. Kyle Van Noy came in, you know, kind of into the season and played huge, huge snaps. It was a massive contributor. An incredible resurgence from Jadeveon Clowney. You know, there's all of these things that happened that were hugely beneficial to this team. But almost all of those guys are now on that list of unrestricted free agents. And, you know, when you look at it and you got to figure out what their market value is, some of these guys have earned themselves huge paydays. And whether it's from the Ravens or from someone else in the marketplace, they're going to be making a lot of money. Justin Madubuike and Patrick Queen are right at the top of that list, right? It's impossible to think that you're going to be able to keep both of those guys. So right away, you go into that scenario and you try to figure out what you're going to do, and then it just goes down from there. A lot of these guys that are important role players. Again, I'm thinking about the Ronald Darbys and the Arthur Millettes and stuff like that. I think there's going to be a good opportunity to re-sign a lot of those guys, but there's no doubt that this Ravens team is going to be very, very different going into next season. It's going to be a very different looking team. And not just on the player side, right? Because again, we're going to talk about this in different segments. The players are one section of that. The coaching staff is another section of that. And it always happens when you're a solid team, everyone else is going to be trying to poach your guys, right? And there will be guys that will overpay. There will be teams that overpay for some of these Ravens players who thrived, particularly on the defensive side, in that Mike Macdonald defensive system. And these guys will generate big value. And we've seen it. Look, this has always been a thing with the Ravens because the Ravens historically have had very, very good defenses. And then you have guys who have gone out and gotten signed for huge amounts of money by other teams, and they've never had the same type of success as they did in the Ravens system. I mean, you can go all the way back to Paul Kruger and some of those guys who were able to parlay the success that they had with the Ravens into huge contracts elsewhere, but were never as impactful as they were in that Ravens defense. And certainly what we saw with the Ravens defense this past year, an historically good defense, those players have now earned a lot of money. The other thing is they now have opportunity to follow their previous defensive coordinator, Mike Macdonald, into a place like Seattle, or an Anthony Weaver to Miami. Or, there's all of these different scenarios of guys because the coaching staff has been decimated as well. So the reality is not only is there going to be more competition for the Ravens existing players than there ever have been, that competition is also going to be coming from guys that they're very familiar with because they came from the Ravens' own coaching staff. And, for better or for worse, one of the criticisms that you hear a lot of times regarding the Steelers and Mike Tomlin is, well, what's Tomlin's coaching tree, right? Like, who is he? Who has come from that Tomlin coaching tree and had success in the NFL? Well, unfortunately, like it or not, Harbaugh has not had that issue. There have been a lot of guys who have come up under this Harbaugh coaching tree and have now been able to go out and find success in the league and other places. And now we're getting to that point where this loss, this brain drain, if you will, this loss is going to be impactful because, again, that's just the player side of the free agencies. Now, when you have to go out and you look at the coaching staff, listen, I'm going to start off this coaching staff segment with a few little details that I think are important, right? There's no doubt John Harbaugh is the winningest coach in Ravens history. He's got a 172 and 109 record, one of the best that you're going to find out there. But I will say this, when he goes out and he loses again, and it is important to understand, Harbaugh's a Super Bowl champion. No one's going to take that away from him. A great coach, 100%. But the Ravens have won a total of 3 playoff games in the last 11 seasons. And it's important to remember that Harbaugh, in his first 4 years, had a 9-4 postseason record. And in recent years, that postseason record is 3 wins and 6 losses. And so it's impossible to not look at that and go, okay, there has to be some concern there. And now you look at a guy like Mike Macdonald leaving and what he was able to accomplish. And, we were making all of these moves and again, this historically good defense. But now there's going to be a lot of pressure on Harbaugh. There's going to be a lot of pressure on Zach Orr, who's now the incoming defensive coordinator. I don't think Zach Orr was a bad choice at all. I mean, it was really, unless you went outside the organization, it was going to be Zach Orr or Anthony Weaver. And the argument could be made that maybe you should have gone with Anthony Weaver because there was a higher likelihood that Zach Orr would stay in the building and, you promote him to maybe associate head coach or something. However, the reality is they went with Zach Orr because clearly they felt like he was the best man for the job. But in doing that, you then lost Anthony Weaver. Okay, well, that is what it is, right? You gain one, you lose one. The problem is you lost Mike Macdonald, then you lost Anthony Weaver. It makes it tough, man. Again, the loss of these important coaches plays a huge role in the success of the team. And so, now we got an Anthony Weaver in Miami. Again, that's AFC, right? So they're bringing a lot of that Ravens skill set and that Ravens scheming into competition in the AFC. Then you look at Denard Wilson, who now goes over to the Titans as their defensive coordinator. And more and more, it just it's tough, right? This is going to be one of the hardest off seasons as a Ravens fan that I can even remember. It's really, really challenging. And a huge part of it is because this has happened a few times. Happened in 2019. It's happening now, where the Ravens have these hugely successful regular seasons. They're so successful that after the regular season, they get picked apart by the rest of the league as if they had won the Super Bowl, right? All of their coaches are getting recruited, all of their players, and all of these things are happening. And then you end up in that situation where it works when you've won the Super Bowl, right? If you go all in, you win the Super Bowl, and then the team, you have a few down years because those assistant coaches get promoted, they go elsewhere, they become head coaches. The problem is this continues to happen for the Ravens, and they aren't getting that win of the Super Bowl out of it. The issue now is becoming that the Ravens are failing in the playoffs, but doing so well in the regular season that it's creating this desire among other teams to pick them apart and cannibalize all of the players that they can sign and all of the coaches that they can pull over. And it's becoming very difficult. The Ravens are becoming known as an awesome regular season team. And there's almost no greater insult you can have in the NFL than being known as a fantastic regular season team, because that means you're a loser when it counts. And it's really, really, going to be a challenging thing. And then there was this little bit of, I don't know what do you want to call it, about this whole Jerry Rosburg situation where he's supposed to be coming back in and helping with game management. And there was such outrage among Ravens fans. And then they decided not to move forward with the deal. I don't think for a moment that whole Jerry Rosburg return didn't die because of the criticism coming from Ravens fans. I really think that that's what killed that deal. I think it was looked at as there was a huge amount of criticism over this coming on the heels of this, huge Ravens loss. Rosburg being brought in, you started to see all kinds of people on X saying, well, what's Harbaugh doing if you have coordinators and assistant coaches doing all of these things, calling all the plays, managing everything, doing everything, and then you even have a guy to be able to game manage essentially? What's Harbaugh doing? The thing a lot of people have to keep in mind is that the NFL is a business, and it's more a business now than it's ever been before. The importance of that business is that now you have to have a CEO. And, you heard for years and years with Rex Ryan when he wouldn't get head coaching opportunities because he didn't look like the face of a franchise, right? He was kind of a heavier guy. He was real loud and brash and outspoken. And this is a multi-billion-dollar organization. Any NFL team is a multi-billion-dollar organization. And that head coach, more and more now than ever, is the face of that. He's the CEO of that multi-billion-dollar organization. And it's important to find the right person, right? And there are concerns, and Harbaugh's really, really good at that aspect of it, being the face of the team, the interaction with the media, managing the relationships with the players, all of those things. I don't think there's any argument. Harbaugh's really, really, really good at that. And the idea that you're going to support him in every way you can with all of these coaches. When I heard Jerry Rosburg was coming back, I thought it was great. Clearly I seem to have been in the minority, at least if I go off of the things that I was seeing on X. But the reality is, I don't ever see anything wrong with having the strongest coaching staff humanly possible. I'm never going to be opposed to that. Whatever you feel about Harbaugh or any other coach for that matter, I don't care if you're a Dolphins fan and you want Mike McDaniels. Don't you want Mike McDaniel to have the best coaching staff he can? It doesn't matter what, if you're a Steelers fan, you would want the same for Mike Tomlin. There's no scenario where you're going, well, this is making that coaching staff too good. Why do we care? We want a good coaching staff, don't we? Isn't that the whole point? And particularly when it's been as tumultuous of an offseason as it's been, to have a familiar face and a steadying hand in the organization, particularly a guy who's experienced in the Ravens organization when there are so many new young coaches and coordinators, I didn't see it as a bad thing at all. However, I think enough people did that they decided to kill the deal. And it's unfortunate because I only think it could have helped. And I don't see any negative to it. So now we're in a situation when, you look across this team, it's going to be looking very, very different next season. The Ravens now are in what I believe, particularly as it pertains to Harbaugh's legacy, coming into next season is as important, if not the most important season ever under Harbaugh for his own legacy. Because now, there is starting to be that feeling of struggle and failure for this team. Nobody's very used to that. Nobody's used to that in Baltimore. Like this, and don't get me wrong, I understand the criticism. Well, you haven't won a Super Bowl since 2012. My point is, Baltimore has always thrived as the underdog. You go on the road, you win in the playoffs, you make it to the Super Bowl that way. This idea of resting starters in the final week of the regular season, getting first round buys, man, it always seems to burn this team. This is a team, much like in the way that they play, they're scrappy, they keep their head down, they grind it out. That seems to be what works the best for them in the postseason as well. They're not a team that is comfortable when they're not staying in their rhythm. Blame it on coaching, blame it on players, whatever you want to do. At the end of the day, it is what it is. Historically speaking, it's a big difference. We've got to figure out what this team is going to look like and what the identity is going to be. Look, there's no doubt in his press conference, Zach Orr said all the right things, right? What you'd want to hear, controlled violence, we're going to go out and hunt and, all of these types of things. And I believe that that's what he's going to bring to the table. I have no doubt about that. I mean, Zach Orr, great player, seems like a great guy, really does. He said it and it seems to be true. I mean, he bleeds purple and black and you got to like that in a guy. But it's going to be a tall order to be able to keep up with what Mike Macdonald was able to accomplish. And particularly if you're going to be doing it with the loss, potentially at least, of some really, really crucial players. Now, there will be new players that come in as well, right? I mean, we've seen what Eric DeCosta has been able to do in the front office with this team. And it's really impressive. But even there in the front office, you're starting to see some of that brain drain that's happening. Joe Ortiz goes to become a general manager of the Chargers. That was going to happen sooner or later. And I'm happy for him because he wasn't going to get that opportunity in Baltimore. There's, Eric DeCosta is relatively new into the job. He's relatively young. He's not going to be giving up that job anytime soon. Ortiz definitely has earned that opportunity. But anytime you lose those guys, it does weaken your organization. And there's no getting around that. And so I just think that this is a tough time for the Ravens. There's lots of calls for optimism. There's lots of reasons and things to point to say, hey, we're in good shape. Lamar played leaps and bounds better this year than he had previously. Lamar Jackson this past season looked like by far the most evolved version that we've seen yet of Lamar Jackson as it pertains to the control, the presence and poise in the pocket, making the right decisions, accuracy, just in general, just really starting to round out as an impressive quarterback. So there's lots of calls for optimism, there. We stayed in-house on the defensive coordinator position. You really hope that that's going to continue to be able to make us strong and you trust that Eric DeCosta is going to be able to make great moves again. People forget, man, there were tons of questions coming into this past offseason about this team. And even early in the season, there were a lot of questions. And then, it wasn't until that latter half of the season, they really started to right the ship and round out into what they're capable of being. So I think there's going to be a lot of things that need to happen. I think there's going to be a lot of moving pieces to it. But really, when you look at those three things, you've got the free agency side, and there's a ton of Ravens free agents. They were really built to win this year, and they didn't get the job done. Then you look at that coaching side, and you recognize this is going to be a very, very different looking team next year. And then, you just have the general offseason things that are going to come up. And look, there are some rumors and stories floating around right now regarding Zay Flowers. Not going to get into the details because I don't know that they warrant being discussed yet, but there is an investigation. Again, not going to go into even what the investigation's about because I'm not going to further any rumors about something that we have absolutely no idea if it's true or not. If it is true, though, it would just be adding insult to injury for this Ravens offseason. So hopefully it's not, and not only for Ravens, the team and the fans, but more importantly for the player and the people involved. Certainly hoping that there's no truth to that and it all gets cleared up. But it's a turbulent time. I'm gonna end this episode tonight with a question. And in fact, not only will I ask the question this episode, I will put this up on a poll on the Purple Perch on our YouTube page. And again, you can check it out, YouTube, the Purple Perch. I'm going to ask this question. It is expected that Lamar Jackson will win his second MVP this weekend, right? Super Bowl weekend as the NFL honors comes up. The question is this: Lamar Jackson should have 2 MVPs at 27 years old. As of right now, is Lamar Jackson a Hall of Fame player? Just taking into consideration what he's done, wins, losses, stats, everything else, if it were to all end right now, is Lamar Jackson a Hall of Fame NFL player? I think there's a strong argument to be made. Some people would be dismissive right away and say, well, he hasn't won a Super Bowl. He hasn't even been to one. He hasn't played well in the playoffs, all of those things. But I think there's a strong argument that if you've won 2 MVPs at the age of 27, at least one of them being unanimous, we don't know if the second one will be, but at least one of them being unanimous, there's a strong argument to make that with all of the records he owns and everything else, Lamar Jackson is probably already a Hall of Famer. So while there's lots of frustration in Baltimore and much of it warranted and very understandable, there are a lot of things to celebrate. And, there's never been a weapon like Lamar. He has shortcomings. He has tremendous strengths. That's going to be the case with anybody, right? Any player out there. Coming into this offseason, there are going to be other answers or questions as well without answers. Like, what do you do with a J.K. Dobbins? What do you do with a Ronnie Stanley? I mean, there's going to be some tough decisions that have to be made. Unfortunately, I think Patrick Ricard could possibly be a casualty or maybe cut and attempt to re-sign, but I think there'd be a market for a Pat Ricard out there. The Ravens have this history at fullback. It's incredible. It's like one of those weird positions. And, you can go back. I mean, from Vontae Leach, Kyle Juszczyk, and now Pat Ricard. You've got so many different guys, and the Ravens have always valued that position a lot. It's almost like tight end for the Ravens. You just historically have really good ones. So anyway, next week, anticipate that I won't be on here solo. I think my buddy Tim's going to be on with me, and we'll go back and forth about some things and kind of share some of the things that we text back and forth. Look, we're just like you guys, right? We're fans of the teams. We share the frustration with the Ravens. We're texting through every game, talking about it the whole off season, the frustration. We've been feeling the same irritation, depression, etc. Going into this off season that everyone else has. It's because we love the team, right? It's frustrating to lose when you shouldn't. And I think the Ravens still have a bright future. There's going to be a lot of good there, but there are a lot of unanswered questions right now. I don't think anyone was overly impressed with the end of season press conferences in terms of the insight that they were able to gather from Harbaugh and anyone else there in the front office. So it's a tough time, man. It's a tough time. It's weird. Most teams would kill for the opportunity to be talking after unfortunately having lost an AFC Championship game, but being one of the final 4 teams in the postseason. And yet for the Ravens, it feels like it was an underperformance based on what this team was capable of. So, we're going to keep fighting, hopeful that things will continue to improve and get better. But that's going to wrap us up for tonight. That's the Purple Perch. Stay tuned. We got more episodes, more content coming. We had an awesome interview a few weeks ago with former Ravens kicker Matt Stover. It's here on our YouTube page. Check it out. Matt was absolutely awesome and so many good stories from his days with the Ravens. So highly recommend, if you're listening to this, go check out that Matt Stover interview as well, because I really think you're going to enjoy it if you're a fan of the team. And yeah, that's it for tonight. Purple Perch out. Thanks, everybody.